Dr. Simone Gold, founder and chair of America's Frontline Doctors and author of I Do Not Consent, My Fight Against Medical Cancel Culture. We also have Josh Herr, former general counsel of the Daily Wire, who ran our legal strategy when we decided to sue the federal government, and Smokey Mike himself, Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show, author of Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, and host of the three-part series Fauci Unmasked. We would have gotten Dr. Fauci himself to be here tonight, but something about the advice of counsel and respectfully declining, so we'll just have to make do without him. Smokey Mike.
What a wonderful introduction. You only brought me here because I do a Fauci impression.
Yeah, I
wanted no other contribution whatsoever. It was a trip down memory lane, wasn't it, to see Fauci on Capitol Hill? Usually when you take a trip down memory lane, it's for nice, warm feelings of nostalgia rather than what we got seeing Fauci, which is just burning feelings of contempt and a reminder of how awful it all was. But the way it came about was pretty odd, because you had 2 days, 3 days prior, this diary published. And it raised two questions. One, where did they get the diary? And two, why did he keep a diary? Because the diary entries were revelatory only in as much as they confirmed every negative thought we had about Fauci. That you can just picture him kicked up on his bed, legs up in the air, just adoring himself, his various portraits on the wall, saying, "Dear diary, I am so beautiful. And today the Washington Post published this lovely picture of me on my good side. Everybody loves me. Yours sincerely, Gossip Girl." And it was just page after page after page of this. So then you say, okay, the reason he kept the diary, one, he probably wants to cash in another way on COVID, which is through his memoirs. But two, because he's a narcissist, because he's really into himself. And he prioritizes, everybody in politics has a little touch of the ego, but he prioritizes that over the truth and over his job. And this is why the hearings, I think, were really important. Rand Paul has been gunning for Fauci more than just about anybody. And he got him. He nailed Fauci at least once, maybe twice, in a way that he perjured himself. The first time he asked Fauci, "Dr. Fauci, did you fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan?" And Fauci said no. But he did. He did fund gain-of-function research. He funded EcoHealth Alliance. His signature's on the document. Fauci probably can squirm out of that because he can say, well, I narrowly redefined gain-of-function research well beyond the scientific consensus, the historical plain use of it. He's speaking to politicians here, so he should be using the terms in plain use.
Depends on what it is.
Exactly. He was doing the Bill Clinton thing. But the second time he perjured himself was much clearer, which was June 3rd of 2024, when he was asked if he spoke about COVID to the intelligence community. And he did. We know that. We know that from declassified CIA memoranda and various IC documents. Now, he tried to walk it back at the end of that testimony, but he just lied. We know that he talked to the IC about it. We also know that he lied by his own standards. The one that I keep going back to is over the masking. Because in the early days of COVID, we all complained about the masks. It was preposterous. They're trying to put little 2-year-olds in masks on airplanes for a year at a time. But early on, he said, you don't need the masks. Ordinary people don't need the masks. And he later admitted that he didn't really believe that. Now, look, I think he was wrong about the masks. I don't think hankies prevent you from getting COVID. But he later said, well, no, I thought you did need the masks, but I lied to people about that because I didn't want ordinary people to go get the masks that I thought they needed because I wanted to preserve them for the healthcare workers. So right off the bat, by his own admission, we are dealing with a liar. That's before the perjury. That's before we see the diaries. That's before any of the documents. And so he shows up to Capitol Hill and he pleads the fifth. Really weird because he received an unprecedented sort of presidential pardon, a pardon for
the
preemptive pardon for all the crimes he may have committed over a long period of time. We never saw anything like that in American history, even as the pardon power has accelerated in the last 4 or 5 decades. So in that case, it would seem to me he doesn't have the right to plead the fifth, because the Fifth Amendment is to prevent self-incrimination. You're already pardoned. And he had two options. He could either tell the truth about every wrong thing he did, including crimes. He wouldn't be prosecuted for it. Or he could lie, as is his wont, and then he could be prosecuted because he would have perjured himself after the pardon. Or he could do what he did, which is plead the fifth, which to me is very dubious, and I would be curious what the lawyer in the room has to say about this. For me, I'm a humble cigar salesman, but it seems to me that he actually could be held in contempt of Congress, which is what Josh Hawley was setting him up to do.
So we have two lawyers in the room.
That's true. I think of you more as a medical person.
Yeah. That's only because she's been disbarred in the state of New York.
Yeah.
We have two lawyers in the room, and I would be curious what each of you thinks about this question of Dr. Fauci pleading the fifth after receiving a pardon. I mean, I suppose that he might argue that he's keeping himself from saying things that would incriminate him at the state level. Is that his argument?
I think there's a case to be made that he could take the fifth to avoid additional criminal charges at the state level, but he used, in my opinion, the Fifth Amendment inappropriately. First of all, he gave an opening statement that was pretty broad, and once he starts talking about something, then he does not have the right to then say, I'm not going to talk about something, right? He used it as a sword and a shield, and you're not allowed to do that. He also, about the Fifth Amendment, he also used it before he was even asked questions. So the Fifth Amendment is specific to a question that you've been specifically asked. That's
sort of like a pardon is supposed to be specific.
Exactly. So that was another inappropriate use of pardon. I think it was. I do believe they're going to hold a hearing next week and do a contempt vote. I think the committee is going to take a vote on contempt. I think it will pass through the committee, and then we'll see what the Senate does. Yeah, that's what I think will happen.
Josh, what are the potential consequences of being found in contempt by Congress?
It ranges the gamut. I imagine that the Republicans would be seeking some sort of prison time, but it's hard to imagine Fauci actually going to prison at this point. But I generally agree with Dr. Gold that we need to test the limits of this game that we seem to be playing, both in terms of president's willingness to issue these far overbroad pardons, including forward-looking, and then secondly, the ability of anyone who's already been pardoned to just not answer questions on apparently no legal basis.
Yeah. And he used it frequently for questions that had no legal implication, right? Senator Hawley asked him what color his tie was, what color the carpet was, and he kept pleading the fifth on that.
And Senator Hawley made the point. He said, well, you actually don't have this privilege. The Supreme Court ruled in 1892 or whatever it was.
That's correct.
When you have received a pardon, when you don't have any criminal liability, that you don't have that privilege then to, because, it's, the whole point of the Fifth Amendment is to prevent self-incrimination. So if you look at the potential consequences, you say, all right, well, he's probably not going to see prison time, up to 12 months. He's probably not going to get the $100,000 fine. We don't really do that very much, except your old buddy Steve Bannon did go to jail precisely for this crime, this misdemeanor. And so why does Steve Bannon go to jail, but Dr. Fauci doesn't?
Right. And you did bring up the most important point about the misuse of how we misuse the Fifth Amendment, which is you have to have a real and appreciable danger. That's actually the standard. I think the case was 1896, I think. I forgot. Burger. But this was a hypothetical danger. Oh, I might hypothetically. No, it has to be real and appreciable danger, which he is not currently facing.
Well, and it's certainly contempt if you want to answer what color your tie is to a United States senator, right, in a hearing. How did we come to be here? You raised this question of how did we get this diary? Yeah. It is a remarkable.
It's a crazy story.
It's a remarkable story.
So as I understand it, look, I think it was on Hunter Biden's laptop when. No, I'm joking. I assumed it was some kind of congressional subpoena that got the files. No, apparently this comes out of HHS. I think it was like Bobby Kennedy found it on some government server.
Yeah.
So you think, man, this is where. Okay, I guess the elites and the bureaucrats, they don't actually control the world because they're so blazingly incompetent. Yeah. Is that you're writing down all of your lies and your perfidy and your crimes, you're preserving it, and then you're putting it on a government server that can just be pulled by the Secretary of HHS and handed over to the US Senate. I mean, it's just such astounding incompetence. You wonder how Fauci was able to manipulate the system for like 40 years.
Can you imagine being whatever staffer it is who was digging through government archives or whatever on some laptop and discovered this diary?
They love me. They love me not. They love me, actually. They do.
I wonder if this is really his diary. Oh, yep.
It is.
Yep. No one else.
Well, and you remember the profiles of him that came out in the later days of COVID? Oh, yeah. They'd have him sitting in his home office. Not a joke. He had a giant portrait of himself in front of his chair at this tiny little corner. I mean, this is a man who truly loves himself, and for whom fame and adulation was more important, certainly, than telling the truth, but also than doing his job effectively, because he not only was lying about COVID and the transmissibility of COVID and the efficacy of the masks and the reasoning behind the 6 feet of social distancing, but then he got everything wrong about the vaccine too. And I don't know if that was intentional, but he did get it wrong. He said that the vaccine would prevent acquiring the virus, then transmitting the virus. And then finally, when those two things were proven wrong, he said it was totally safe. People died from it. And then when all of those things were proven wrong, he said, well, it would have been a lot worse if you didn't take it, which is an unfalsifiable claim. So I don't know. He just bungled every aspect of it.
Well, Dr. Gold, you were talking before the show about this is sort of part and parcel of being Anthony Fauci, right? Some of these claims.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up so many different interesting points. One is, who is he as a person? He's obviously a megalomaniac, probably narcissistic, kind of sociopathic guy. Who does this? Who's so smug? Who is such hubris that you're keeping your personal diary on the NIH server? I mean, that just, we could talk about that for days. That's just crazy.
In fairness, the guy's in his 80s, and everybody I know in their 80s who engages with technology is probably calling their grandson and how do I move it off of the server?
Password 123.
Except, I know you're being funny, but remember the emails, the disclosures from his assistant, David Moranz, who specifically said, I'm sending this to your personal Gmail. We want to keep this off the NIH servers. Everything I do with NIH is FOIA'd. So we have a guy who simultaneously was keeping his personal diary, saying everything truthful from his perspective on the work server, but wasn't actually doing work on the work server that he didn't want the American people to discover. To me, that's a crime right there. He has a long history of doing this. So yes, I am a doctor and a lawyer, and most people do think of me as a doctor. But back in the 80s, I was in law school up in California. So that was right when AIDS was coming out. So I had a lot of experience with that. Pretty funny thing to consider that all the people who are very anti-Fauci right now tend to be political conservatives, right? Just go back and look at the news. The people who hated Fauci back then were the Democrats. They absolutely hated him. Why? Because he did the same playbook in the AIDS crisis that he did in the COVID crisis. And let me just explain. When you think of the 3 foundational lies that he did during COVID, one was the social distancing. By the way, completely made up. If you wonder why he said 6 feet, it's because you had to close everything. That was kind of the size that you had to do. If you had said 3 feet, the schools could have stayed open, but schools basically didn't have a footprint large enough to do 6 feet, so it was closing. So that 6-foot social distancing was a huge foundational lie. As you all know, he admitted as much, in January of 24 in congressional testimony. He said that we couldn't use a cheap, safe generic drug, right? Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. He said, no, verboten, can't use those. Cheap, safe generic drug. And the third foundational lie he did is, we're going to get this vaccine. It's going to save the world. It's going to be amazing. So for me, those are 3 huge foundational lies. And by the way, he knew more than, you're giving a little too much of a pass than you should in terms of what he knew about the masks. He knew the masks didn't work. His whole career, he knew the masks didn't work. He backpedaled later said he thought there'd be a
So he was
supply
lying
chain
when
issue.
he said.
Absolutely was lying, because his whole career, no doctor thinks paper works to keep out. Just for comparison size, the virus is 1/1000th the size of a hair, right? So keeping a cloth in front of your face is literally like putting up a chain link fence to keep out a mosquito. Yeah, it doesn't work. So he knew that. Now, how do these 3 lies compare to what he did during AIDS? Okay, let's look at them. Social distancing, 6-foot social distancing. Do you remember, I don't know who's old enough to remember the fear that there was against gay people, right? Because Fauci told the world that AIDS could be casually transmitted, but he knew it wasn't casually transmitted. We went through about 7 years of people being very afraid to even be near somebody who was gay. That was the original social distancing. The second lie he did, there's a drug called Bactrim, which is a cheap, safe generic drug, sulfa drug that women use all the time for kidney infections, bladder infections. It works really well for the AIDS pneumonia. But he was kind of blocking our usage of it. I know, because I was moonlighting as a doctor during this time, right? And why was he doing that? Because he wanted to get the AIDS vaccine out. It was the same playbook. So I called COVID Fauci 2.0, and his trial run was the AIDS epidemic, and he did the same 3 things: the social distancing, there's a cheap, safe generic drug that we have to block in pursuit of a vaccine. And Fauci, as you know, has been there for 40 years, and in this 40 years, he's just the amount that the budget that he started to control just blew up exponentially. Basically, any federal funding for any kind of science, medical issues essentially went through his hands.
What motivates it? Why If the vaccine is like the ultimate objective, what benefit is there to Fauci of pioneering, of being in a government position when one of these vaccines is pioneered?
I'm going to answer you a little bit laterally to your question, which is, why does a physician go into the public health space to begin with? It is a specific kind of physician. And if you go back and look into the public health services, it derived from the children. They were like Vietnam War draft dodgers, like the elite parents who had kids. They didn't want to go through the draft. They could serve the military time in the public health services. So their nickname was the Yellow Berets. They were the Yellow Berets. That is the world that Fauci inhabited, because most physicians, when they go to medical school, they actually want to take care of patients. That is not the choice he made for himself. So I'll answer what I think, but from the outset, he distinguished himself as a human who wasn't interested in the same kind of medicine that I'm interested in, which is to help the human in front of me. People who gravitate towards public health are a different sort of, they come from more of an authoritarian, they come from a worldview that we can make centralized decision-making on population levels, not for the individual in front of me. And I would submit to people it's antithetical to being a doctor, actually being a public health official. Beyond that, I do think he's a narcissist and a sociopath.
On the public health point, it's a really good insight, because I've just noticed anecdotally, not all the time, I don't want to generalize too much, but 99.9% of the time, the people who gravitated toward public health in school and graduate school, they were the most insufferable liberal women you've ever met in your entire life. And I don't know what attracted them to it, but I can start to guess, which is the same reason that the left speaks about their love of humanity in the abstract. The very same people who are so concerned about some anonymous Zimbabwean on the other side of the world and why we need to fund programs to get money to them or whatever, those are the very same people who are really nasty to the people all around them immediately. It's like that heat map of loves. And, which Vance mentioned many months ago about the Ordo Amoris, the order of love. And it's not that you don't want to care about the guy in Zimbabwe, but you have greater responsibility to the people closest to you. And there was that social scientific study that the left cares much more about the people they can't touch than the people close to them. And C.S. Lewis talks about this in Screwtape. In Screwtape, the elder demon writing to his nephew says, look, people are going to have this inclination to love, and you can't totally stamp that out. So just make sure that you direct it in the most abstract way possible toward the public health, toward the masses, the hoi polloi. Make sure it's never practical. It's never anyone close to them, because then it's never really real.
Yeah. That was really well said, Michael. I mean, that's really what I'm getting at, is that I think foundationally from day one, he was not the same as when you think of a doctor. Yeah. He has an MD after his name, but his love is really public health, which is very tyrannical and authoritarian.
Well, I don't think of him as a doctor. I think of him as the science. When I think Anthony Fauci, I think this guy represents,
of course,
the science. To attack him.
And attacks on him are attacks on science.
It's an attack on science itself.
What data?
Well, I do think of him as a politician, really. I mean, I know he presents himself as a scientist, but he became the most powerful politician in the country for 2 years. And he's really sat atop this bureaucracy for a long time, which is why I keep coming back to the contempt of Congress issue. Are you ever going to put him in an orange jumpsuit? Is he ever even going to be fined? Because he's a really good bureaucrat. I mean, it's kind of like game, respect, game. Like he really was very good at pulling those levers of power. And yet you have seen political operatives being held to account. A guy like Steve Bannon, John Bolton is going to probably see prison time for a relatively minor offense compared to anything Anthony Fauci did. And yet this guy, who's been a political operator his whole life, much more than he's been a doctor, this guy looks like he's going to get away with it.
Yeah. Josh, this presidential pardon issue, we've seen it increase. Really, the pardoning of the draft dodgers in Vietnam was such a turning point in what the pardon power of the president even is. Now we're getting into pardoning people for these sort of blanket periods of time. Anything that they did or might have done in a blanket period of time. We had the last days of the Biden administration in which the president pardoned basically the entire administration and his family for anything that they may ever be accused of doing with no actual accusations having been made. This is certainly going to come to a head because President Trump is going to be the first president to pardon himself. I think that there's, again, it's a made-up statistic, but 99.9% Donald Trump is going to pardon himself on his last day
He kind of has to, right?
in office.
He's learned that lesson that he needs to.
He's learned the lesson that he needs to, but obviously that creates or removes any incentive that a president has to avoid corruption. If the president can pardon himself, and he knows that going in, you might argue, well, Donald Trump is doing it because having been president, having left office, having been unjustly persecuted and prosecuted after the fact, he's learned the lesson that you must. But for the next guy, that now you have foreknowledge of the ability to pardon yourself. You've removed all the disincentive against corruption. What are we ultimately going to do about this?
There's not a whole lot that we can do easily short of a constitutional amendment or a decision ultimately from the Supreme Court ruling that a president has gone too far, either in pardoning himself or issuing a pardon that's far too broad or too forward-looking. Unfortunately, that means that we're going to have to see legal challenges to some of these pardons, which, the risk of that is reducing the pardon power to such a level that you can't actually use it in situations where it's most appropriately used. But we've now seen across likely 3 presidencies an abuse of the power, and something needs to change before it's abused in the way you described, where now it's just a cover for corruption.
Well, you could say it's gone even deeper back than that, because what Biden did was unprecedented, there's no question. But I trace this back to Ford. Ford pardons Nixon, as he should have. But one of the big objections to that was that Nixon never accepted responsibility. That there's an increase in the contention here around the presidential pardon. Then you get to Jimmy Carter. He pardons the draft dodgers from Vietnam. Now, this is a weird one because he's not pardoning particular people. He is pardoning them for a particular crime, but he's not pardoning particular people. He's pardoning anyone who might have dodged the draft, who might ever be discovered to have dodged the draft. Okay, that's churning it up a little bit further. Then you get to guys like Bill Clinton, who were clearly abusing the power, but it was totally within their rights, and I don't think you could really seriously challenge it. And Bush and Obama and so on and so forth. And now Biden turns it up even further, which is you're not specifying. You're specifying the people. You're not specifying any particular crime being committed. You're not specifying any particular time period over the course of a decade. You're really ratcheting up. And to your point, Jeremy, President Trump almost certainly has to pardon himself now. The Dems have blown that precedent out because they tried to prosecute Trump. So what do you do about it? And I guess I'm not that worried, actually, about the presidential pardon power. We on the right are always afraid of the presidency becoming too imperial, because Obama, in particular, was heavy-handed about this. And I don't like that, and would that it were different, I suppose, would that the 20th century had developed differently. But I don't think the real threat to our sovereignty, our political rights, our individual rights right now is coming chiefly from the executive branch. I think a lot of it is coming from the legislative branch, which doesn't do its job, which outsourced a lot of its power, which is constantly threatening to destroy the judicial branch.
Yes, the legislative branch failed to use its power, but it gave that power to the executive.
Kind of.
Which makes the presidency, in theory, more imperial than it was.
Except that the president basically doesn't have any power over the agencies. I mean, this is it kind of created a new branch of government. That's been a lot of the big fight of Trump's second term.
Yeah, he's not the chief executive if he isn't the chief of the executive branch.
Yeah, I mean, this is why Scalia, notably, and a lot of other people have harped so much on the unitary executive, why the left has made a boogeyman over that, is that the unitary executive theory, correct me if I'm wrong, lawyers in the room, is just that the president has control over the executive branch, which he doesn't. And so then you get the legislature giving away a lot of its power on one hand, and then usurping a lot of power on the other, because now they're threatening to blow up the whole Supreme Court. And the court, by the way, is not innocent in all of this, because the court, if any branch of government is imperial, it's probably the Supreme Court, which effectively has no check on its power and operates as this kind of super branch of government. And so I'm concerned about the government becoming overly powerful and capricious and taking away our rights and all that. But I'm actually not chiefly concerned about the executive. Let the president have his pardon power. I'd rather see reform of the legislature and of the judiciary.
Although you say that on this side of the abuses of the pardon that I'm concerned about. Because even in the case of Ford pardoning Nixon, for example, that's a political event that takes place within the political system. Presumably, if the person who assumes the presidency after you is from the other party, you may not get that pardon that you're looking for. And you could say, well, that could never happen because the entire, Nixon steps down and there's order of succession. But the way the order of succession works does not always redound to the benefit.
And Ford was Nixon's second choice.
Was his second choice.
Yeah.
You quite often, for example, have a Secretary of State who's from a different party, and we can very easily paint a scenario where the Secretary of State is who would inherit power in one of these scenarios. So it takes away the ability of the people through the electoral process to do anything about corruption once this becomes the norm. So I understand saying, well, the way that the pardon's been used up until now, I don't like it, but it's not a thing that I'm overly concerned about. I'm just worried about what it's about to become.
Yeah, well, it just speaks to corruption. And corruption, whether it's in the executive or anywhere else, is really poisonous to a system.
Yes.
Whether it's your party doing it or the other party, or it's usually a little bit of both parties. But it's really poisonous because then you no longer have trust in the system at all. And it's really, once that stain is on you, it's really hard to get it off.
And the people who benefit from corruption are almost always the left.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Corruption is essentially a charge that's used against the right to bring left-wing populists into office. I mean, that may not be true hypothetically, but in practice, that's almost always.
Yeah.
Always the truth.
And they'll, of course, be much more corrupt than we ever were.
But that's not, somehow the left doesn't have to abide by any rules around corruption or something. It's like,
Yeah. I think it's kind of built into the left-wing ideology, which just prioritizes will over anything else, So it's whether we're talking about philosophical materialism, whether we're talking about Karl Marx going out and saying everything that exists deserves to perish. We philosophers have sought to understand the world. We seek to change it. I mean, for them, it's just, they'll just do whatever they want. I mean, it is a true tyranny of the will, whereas for at least when we do that, sometimes we try to reason our way out of it. We have a patina of reasonability about it,
Yeah.
Well, along with what you're saying, I had not thought of that question that you raised about the power, of the pardon, but it reminded me of one of our founding fathers. Remind me which one, who said, self-governance is really only for moral and religious people.
John Adams.
John Adams, yeah. And so right, because I'm thinking of like Obama having unlimited pardons would have been just.
No, but he was a religious Muslim at least.
Exactly.
Oh.
No, I don't know. Allegedly.
What he was a religious figure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I was talking about this with some friends at dinner last night, that, part of what made Barack Obama so singular in our national politics is that he both thought he was above the office of the presidency and his supporters agreed.
Yeah.
They didn't see him as a political figure on a sort of fundamental level. They saw him as a transcendent figure.
Yeah. Yeah, even more so than, FDR really blows up a lot of our standards and norms because he becomes the American monarch.
Right.
So much so that everyone else agreed after he left office that we need to term limit the presidents for the first time ever. But he wasn't a religious figure.
No, he was not.
He was a monarchical figure, but he wasn't religious. Obama kind of transcended it in the way that Oprah transcended being a TV lady into being some kind of goddess of sorts.
But just to bring back to Fauci, so did Fauci. I went around the nation in 21 and 22 and 20, really, and Fauci was revered. It was incredible, like a god. It was like a religion. People really revered him.
Well, that's right. They thought that he was going to save them, that he and the science that he represents, which science took on a religious quality on the left in 2020.
But there were so many things that we doctors knew were just, like he was saying, was flat out false, like completely violated Public Health 101. Completely, like natural immunity. Even in March of 2020, Fauci said, of course, natural immunity is good and strong. And then he reversed himself. So he had so many examples like that. And I think this is why people rightfully should not be trusting institutions.
But one of the real issues, too, on the science of it all is that our scientific education is so weak right now. And it's weak because it doesn't include humanities education. So there's, the right has pushed for so long to say, if you're going to go to school, you got to study engineering or hard sciences or whatever. But I don't think that's true exactly. I think we need more people to study philosophy and history, not just because it's delightful and fun and we can sit in lovely leather offices with all sorts of old books, but because you actually don't know how to do science if you don't have a philosophical and ultimately religious underpinning to it. The most egregious example now is you have doctors who are killing patients through euthanasia or medical assistance in dying, which is totally contrary to the Hippocratic Oath. And in the case of Fauci, or killing babies or what have you, chopping up little kids, but in the case of Fauci, like there should have been this thought in the mind of the public scientists, which is, okay, yes, I guess if we really want to prevent the transmission of all viruses, we can lock all of ourselves up into a hyperbaric chamber. That's the perfect way to prevent the transmission of a virus. But what is science for? What is the public health for? What is it worth it? If you're going to prevent the spread of a virus by 0.002%, is it really worth it to force everyone's elderly parents to die alone? Is it really worth it to keep kids out of school for 3 years? Is it really worth it to stop people from getting married and having babies? Beneath the scientific recommendations, there has to be a sense of what is the human person and what is society for.
But if all you loved, as you pointed out earlier, all you loved are the people who are far away from you, you don't even put those into the calculation. A lot of what went wrong is we started treating doctors and medicine as though it was a bit of a religion. And I think I'm the only person in the room today who's Jewish. And people have often asked me why I spoke up and why I went, very vocal on this. And it's because in the Jewish religion, there's a concept called pikuach nefesh, which means is to save a life. And it comes from Leviticus 18:5. It says, he shall live by them, live. And so it's very like a commandment to live. So virtually every Jewish law is abridged in the saving of a life. So much so that Maimonides has said, if you even hesitate, if you think there's a life that might be at risk, you have to go, and if you hesitate, you're going to be held to account for just the hesitation. Yeah. So pikuach nefesh, so medicine is a profession, but pikuach nefesh is a moral foundation, and they're missing kind of the moral foundation to which you apply the medicine, you apply the science. Kind of think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a great point. Even just down to the idea that life is good. Our pal Father Rutler talks about this story. One time he was walking around New York with I think a conservative Supreme Court justice. They're chatting about politics and all these sorts of things. And in a bookshop, in the self-help section, the Hemlock Society, the Suicide Society, which has renamed itself to some euphemism, they had a book on killing yourself. And it was in the self-help section. And you say, well, that's not self-help, and there's this strain through Maimonides, through Jewish tradition, through the Christian tradition, and through natural philosophy, that actually life is good. It just is good.
It's an inherent good.
It's actually why it wasn't enough for you to be a lawyer. You also had to be a doctor. Because you wanted your Jewish mother to be proud of you. And
to be super doubly proud.
Yeah, that's right.
I had to distinguish myself and my family. But you're exactly right, that life itself is inherently valuable. So you mentioned MAID, medical assistance in dying. MAID was legalized in Canada. I think it's been 7 years now, it might be 6 years. It is now the 6th leading cause of death in Canada are doctors killing people. And it's considered okay. And then the moment MAID became legal in Canada, you started having like civil rights groups saying you have to be able to expand it for the mentally ill, because they had excluded the mentally ill, they excluded children. Now there's all these arguing about, well, now you're being prejudiced against the mentally ill, you're not allowing them to kill themselves. So you have to start with, do you think life is inherently valuable?
Yeah.
This is also why in the pro-life movement, there's this question of, well, what about the life of the mother? And it always seems very callous to people when conservatives don't entertain those sorts of carve-out provisions.
Yeah.
I honestly think that a huge part of the reason the conservatives are reluctant to embrace exceptions for the life of the mother is because we know that the second you say yes to that, you're going to get into the question of the quality of life of the mother.
The emotional health.
The emotional life of the mother. That nothing can ever be contained once you allow the left really to have sort of its corrosive interpretation.
Yes, and because there are, not to get too like scholastic about it or something, but if you're treating an ectopic pregnancy or you're whatever real threat there could be to the health of the mother, I'm not a medical doctor, but it seems to me basically in every circumstance, you can treat the problem according to which the baby will die, but you are not aiming to kill the baby. And basically, I think there are one or two carve-outs that get a little murkier. But so you say, okay, well, what if we just establish the principle that you can't kill the baby, and then, consider the principle of double effect, or how to treat certain cancers or ectopic pregnancy or what have you. But they don't want to do that because we're right. Because that the reason they want the exception is just to expand it endlessly.
And it's the same with medical-assisted suicide. Forget the medical-assisted part, because there is this question of the Hippocratic Oath and what a doctor is for. But I think that we can all imagine an edge case scenario where we understand why someone would take their life. If someone were under excruciating pain, being tortured, by the Viet Cong in some prison, and they had the opportunity to end their suffering, you can imagine a sort of crime of passion answer to suicide.
Well, the great philosopher Norm Macdonald made this point. He said, people always say that they can't imagine why someone would take their own life. And I always say to them, do you not know about life? Do you not know about this hellish facade that we're in? So one can at least imagine. You don't recommend it, but you can.
You don't recommend it, but you can imagine. You can imagine a world where you would have nothing but compassion for the person who takes their life in that particular set of circumstances. But it's never contained. Yeah. Nothing is ever contained to those extreme cases that we're discussing. And I actually think that there was a thing that happened before the second half of the 20th century, and really even the later second half, the last quarter of the 20th century, where we all did sort of accept that there were edge cases, and we turned a blind eye to the edge cases.
Yeah, right.
And you would experience this in all kinds of places in life almost until the 21st century, where a guy in a dress there'd be a guy in a dress at the mall. Maybe he'd even go in the women's restroom, and women didn't like it. They didn't feel fear; they felt pity. Yeah. And they didn't feel that their space was invaded. They felt a deep sadness and kind of turned a blind eye to the thing that was happening. Or, the end of
society?
No.
No, that's what we're in right now.
When do we put down Lenny?
Of Mice and Men.
Of Mice and Men, thank you.
Yeah, right.
That there are these cases, or you'd always hear the story. It's somewhat apocryphal, but I'm sure we all had a version of it where, the guy ran over a child coming out of the grocery store and tried to flee, and somebody in a pickup truck chased him down, drove him off the road, and his truck explodes into flames, and 50 people see it, and the cops come and say what happened. And everybody's like, I didn't see a thing.
Not a jury in the world.
Not a jury in the world. Like we all used to understand that there are these sort of edge cases, and the best thing you can do is sort of have there, but for the grace of God. I don't really want to face it. The left tries to turn all of those into the norm.
Yeah.
They try to say, well, no, it's not that there are a few very broken people in the world. It's that, and you have a kind of compassion. Well, now you can't afford to look at these situations exclusively through the lens of compassion. Yep. You can't afford to turn a blind eye because we're going to normalize all of these edge cases into more and more and more normal life until essentially every person and every circumstance is the exceptional circumstance.
Well, this brings us right back to the Fauci point, or the presidential pardon point, I should say, which is the presidential pardon is good. It is good that we have that. It is a way to season justice with mercy. And our framers put it in for a reason, and they were right to do so. And a guy might be pardoned for embezzlement, and a guy might be pardoned for murder. Right. Who knows? And it is good for the executive, the thumotic part of the government, to be able to exercise mercy. We cannot legalize embezzlement. We cannot legalize mercy. And that's when Trump was asked about the trans bathrooms in 2016, his answer irritated conservatives. His answer irritated social conservatives because he didn't say, no, the rights of women can't be violated and the rights of women to play volleyball in school are so sacrosanct. And he didn't say any of that. He said, what? They're doing what in bathrooms? He goes, how was it working before? I don't think there was ever a problem. Let's just do that.
I remember that, actually.
But they wouldn't let us do that. Yeah. They wouldn't let us look away to the one weirdo in the town at the mall. They forced us to confront it. And really, they were testing our moral resolve and our willingness to have justice.
Right.
Mercy is exploitable.
Yeah.
Right. And just in the same way that we're experiencing free speech becoming a part of the American immune system that foreign governments are figuring out ways to exploit. And that was going on, obviously, in the 50s when Stalin was trying to take over Hollywood and all the things that happened with SAG and everything in the early
Civil rights movement.
Happened in the Civil Rights Movement. But we're experiencing it right now in such a major, pronounced way on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Where foreign actors are able to manufacture social proof in our country by way of exploiting the anonymous internet and creating the illusion of mass support for ideas. And the thing about the illusion of mass support for ideas is it becomes the reality of mass support for ideas because of human psychology.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a game I play on Twitter now, which is basically unusable, but I'm a masochist, so I still go on it. But you post something, and if it touches on one of these issues that's going to have foreign interest involved, or I don't know, just touch on something where there could be organized opposition, you immediately get 10,000 replies, and they all look kind of weirdly similar, and they're all from accounts that were just created yesterday. And because of Elon, he kind of destroyed Twitter, but one thing he did to help fix it a little, you can look and see where is the tweet coming from, and which is, you can get around it with VPNs. But often it will be from someplace in the middle of nowhere, Pakistan or whatever. And you say, okay, well, this is clearly a coordinated effort to come in and shape American public opinion. Because it's not that most people pay attention to Twitter, but most people who shape public opinion live on Twitter. And the key to these influence campaigns, which certainly are exploited by our adversaries, the key to them that a lot of people don't understand is they're not making up an issue out of whole cloth. They don't work when they make up an issue out of whole cloth. The way, in the USSR, Russia was the best at this for the entire 20th century. The way that they really get at you and divide the public and create problems for you is by taking an existing tension and exploiting it. This is why you look at the civil rights movement, there's a lot of good stuff happening in the civil rights movement, a lot of stuff that was just and overdue. But what the Soviet Union saw was there are racial tensions. We are going to exploit them to the hilt. They almost destroyed the country in the 1960s because of it.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, along these lines with the transgender movement, for example, it's an unbelievably tiny number of people, like unbelievably tiny. And we've been taught and told and down our throats that it's a huge problem. It's actually not. It's tiny, tiny, tiny numbers.
Well, I'm gonna challenge you there. It isn't.
No, it isn't.
It isn't now.
It is correct.
Because among
correct.
Younger Gen Z
Sorry,
and Gen Alpha,
I said it badly. Badly. We understand each other.
the number is enormous because they have defined it toward normalcy.
The real numbers.
That's right.
The real numbers are incredibly low. It's a social contagion. It's actually not transgender. It's rapid onset gender dysphoria, which they crucified the woman who came up with that name, but it's essentially a TikTok disease. It's a social contagion.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
It's a TikTok disease.
To the point that a few years ago, NBC reported 30% of Gen Z identified not just as trans, but it was LGBTQ. And you say, hold on, are there that many guys who like guys and girls that like girls and guys who think they're girls? And no, they just kind of expanded out the definition such that if you had a stupid haircut and you listened to alternative music, you were now part of this.
And this is why
but I think, I'm sorry, I think worse than that. Because now that to be queer, because that's the kind of catch-all bucket for these kids, to be divergent just means what you're not. And what you're not is the thing that's bad. And the thing that's bad is cis, hetero, Christian, is anything orthodox. And so they've actually created incentive to say that you must be different because to be the same is to be in the only category of people for whom there aren't special provisions, moral provisions and legal provisions within the system.
Yeah, there was a guy, I remember in college, there was a guy who called himself not heterosexual. This guy did very well with the ladies. He was, I mean, it was Yale, so, you know, there's, it's 1 in 4 maybe
Was he
more.
British?
Was he? Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, prep school, whatever. But this guy did well with the ladies. When I said, what are not heterosexual? What are you talking about? And is it like, I don't know, he, took a shower with the fellas after the track meet or something? No, what he wanted was to be special. What he wanted was to not be the bad thing.
But what we saw that was different because we go through fads and stages of influences. But where I hold the doctors to account, and Fauci's part of this, but not in the transgender space, there were others, is the doctors, if they're coming at it without a moral foundation, then when they're facing this like social contagion, the doctors all of a sudden put on lifelong, irreversible, permanent harm forever and ever.
Yeah.
That's new. I have never seen that as a physician, where all of a sudden you could chop off body parts, you could tell fanciful things such as you happen to be XY in every one of your cells. Every cell, your brain cell, your heart cells, your lung cells, your toenail cells, your hair cells, they're all XY, but somehow we're all gonna change that just by like a little bit of surgery. Are you kidding me? So I feel that the doctors without the moral foundation are doing unbelievable harm. We need to put a few of them in jail. I agree with you, it's not gonna be Fauci, but transgender would be a good place to start. Put a few of them in jail and you can kind of correct the physician's behavior, because the physician is given authority by society to amplify the harm that would otherwise just be a fad and like just kind of move on.
Well, there's another component to this too, which is manipulations beget manipulations. And you feel it in law because when you talk to people with legal backgrounds, they always tell you, that politics is the art of the possible. They all have this view of the law which is not constrained in any way, and it's because they spend their lives, with respect to the both of you, they spend their lives arguing over where the comma is in a sentence, and then determining whether or not the sentence means exactly what the parties who signed it meant when they signed it, or now what would best benefit their client on the basis of where a comma is, even though the client clearly knew what the common meaning of it was when they agreed to it. And this happens even more so in the manipulation of the flesh. This is why very few people go to war and lose a brother and tattoo his name on their shoulder and the date of his birth and the date of his death. In which case you go, yeah, I can't argue with that tattoo, man. That's a real tattoo. You mark that permanently in your flesh, I understand. No, what really happens though is that once people start manipulating the flesh, then now they put a rose garden around the date, and then now the rose garden turns into thorns coming down their arm, and before you know it, well, unless they've murdered somebody, they probably don't get a face tattoo, but people cover their entire bodies in tattoos, it becomes very addictive. Similarly, plastic surgery, I've had a cosmetic procedure and loved it. I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made for myself. So I'm not against most things in moderation. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But it is very hard once you start manipulating the flesh to keep it in moderation. We all know people who got a facelift in their late 50s and look good. And you're like, oh man, you did something great for yourself, and good for you. But we know of far more people who got a facelift in their late 50s and look kind of good, and then start looking weirder. And you're like, what happened? Well, I got another one. You didn't need another. You did it.
Enough. Yeah.
You did it. And then the next thing you know, we see these photos and huge lips and like a completely transformed human. Why? Because for the same reason that a teenager will cut themselves, and then the next thing you know, they cut themselves. Like now they're in a category of behavior, not just a thing that they did. Manipulations of the flesh beget manipulations of the flesh. I'm not saying that all manipulation of the flesh leads to those sorts of outcomes. Some people can do things moderately. Some people can. I always talk about destination vices. I kind of like destination vices. I think it's fun to go to Vegas and lose $500 at the craps table once every 5 years. Yeah. But once you have online ubiquitous vice, online gambling, it's so and you can't stop it. There's nothing that moderates it. I think that doctors have to have extreme moral core. Mm-hmm. You want your doctors to be religious. You want your doctors to function within institutions that that supply guardrails, because their job, unlike most of our jobs, their jobs manipulate. And this is more for surgeons even than for other kinds of doctors, manipulate the flesh, and that becomes a very addictive thing to want to see what is the furthest extreme that I can take this to.
The doctors really have become, in the transgender space, they've become incredibly Frankensteinish.
Yes.
Yeah. I really want to see some of it. You just need to put 2 or 3 of them in jail, and the industry will collapse. And again, society gives doctors permission to do things that in any other universe they'd be, in jail for decades.
But you think, a lot of them, it's crazy to say, they don't know what it is they're even supposed to be doing. They don't, psychology, it occurred to me the other day, psychology is the study of the soul. It's the psyche, which means soul. And so it's not just the study of the physical, but it's the study of the immaterial, because our intellect is immaterial. It's distinct from our brain, and there are all sorts of good explanations as to why that is. But even if people don't say they believe that, we all act as though that's true. And the psychologist, therefore, maybe more than any other kind of clinician, at least as much as any other clinician, has to know what a human being is. Yeah. And yet you send a kid who has gender dysphoria to the psychologist, and 99 times out of 100, the shrink is going to come in and say, oh, well, yeah, all right, you are Sally now, and we're going to put you on a bunch of drugs that are going to be very bad for your body and probably end up killing you early.
So I have so many things to say about that. So this is a passion of mine. As you can tell from Frontline Doctors, we do a lot of legal support on these cases. So there's a case, Childs v. Salazar, it's in Colorado. I think it's Colorado. And actually, the governor of the state actually said that the psychologists can't speak about biological truth, that they could speak about the gendered reassignment, but they couldn't speak about biological truth, which is viewpoint discrimination.
Yeah.
So it's almost a very easy case because it was so far past the line. But you have situations where the doctors have lost their moral foundation, but the government has also lost their moral foundation.
Yeah.
And we're literally fighting to speak reality. And it's very harmful for the
And it's
average
even
person.
frustrating to hear on this point on viewpoint discrimination, which really comes up in American law, in my understanding, not having been to law school, in the latter part of the 20th century, and it really kind of explodes in the 80s and 90s, that we have this protection against viewpoint discrimination, which we conservatives have used a lot to win victories against the left in the last 10, 15 years. But even that, it's so pathetic, because what we're now saying is, no, some psychologists at least have the right sometimes to tell a boy that he's a boy. When in fact, what we should be saying is what we've said since Hippocrates, since the entire medical profession, which is, no, you don't just have the right to tell the boy that he's a boy. You have an obligation to tell the boy that he's a boy.
But we have a Supreme Court justice who is unsure about that.
Yes,
Right?
correct.
This is why it's important for us to see this sort of public re-examination of Dr. Fauci through, is that, as you said, Jeremy, Dr. Fauci was the science for a couple years there.
Yeah.
And now I hope more people, after seeing this sort of reevaluation of Dr. Fauci, will ask, well, the science according to whom?
Yeah.
People will know to think, oh, it's not that somebody is telling me something that is observed and observable. There is a whole set of layers of values and assumptions going into what's being communicated to me as the science, and I need to ask those questions before I trust what somebody is telling me as science.
Somebody asked me today how I knew that Fauci was off, and when did I know, right? And I said, if you had really been paying attention, as I was as an ER doctor, because I was super interested in the subject, right? It's an emergency, it's a medical emergency, yay, this is my specialty. So I was focused on every coronavirus task force, and I was listening to him. And what I found shocking was I seemed to know more than he did on many subjects. He never mentioned, even before it became politicized, hydroxychloroquine worked. Now, by February of 2020, there were many studies across the world showing that hydroxychloroquine was helpful. Why? Because COVID was SARS-2. Remember SARS-2 implies there's a SARS-1. Well, SARS-1, it turned out hydroxychloroquine worked really well for SARS-1. So early scientists were studying hydroxychloroquine. Lo and behold, it worked. And I'd be watching the coronavirus task force meetings, and I'm like, why is he not even discussing this? Later on, we've heard from Dr. Atlas, who said he was unbelievably ill-prepared. He couldn't talk about anything scientific. He didn't know any of the science. He didn't know any of the data. It was shocking. And Dr. Atlas was right there listening. And so it's embarrassing that he was given the authority, and I am sorry that he was given that authority. And one of the things I'm passionate about is making sure people don't outsource their thinking, like David Thoreau would say, right? Don't outsource your thinking to anybody.
There are two misused concepts, I think, that converged in this moment. One of them is we don't understand the difference between truth and a tool. Science isn't truth. Science is a tool. It's an incredibly useful tool. Rationalism, materialism, they have borne unbelievable fruit. They may be the best, they may be the most practically effective systems for thinking about a problem that we've ever conceived of. It is science itself, scientific reasoning itself is a technological advancement. It's something that we figured out how to do. And when we figured out how to do it, it unlocked the modern world. It's lifted billions of people out of poverty. We don't die like they do in Europe because our houses get cold. I like that our houses get cold. I'm not against materialism. I'm not against rationalism. I think it's great. I'm going to keep it a nice 68 degrees when I go to sleep tonight. But all it is a tool. It can't tell us anything profound about the world. It can't tell us who we are. It can tell us something of what we're made of. It can't tell us why we were made. It's in the hands of a person who avails themselves of many of the tools that have been available to us, psychology, theology. It can be harnessed for the good. I think that when it becomes the tool, when we stop seeing it as a tool and we see it as a kind of religious or replacement for religion, we see it as an all-encompassing source of truth, then, it's no different than using any other tool inappropriately. It's like trying to, it's like trying to cut a cake with a baseball bat. it doesn't do what it was made to do anymore.
Even when you're talking about science here, you're using it in this very modern sense, which is to refer mostly to technology, technical developments in our understanding of the world. But initially and at its core, science just means knowledge. And the very fact that we've narrowed it so much to mean technology.
Well, I don't mean technology. I mean the scientific process.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm saying that the scientific process is itself technology.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about doodads. I'm talking about the way that we interact with science as it is today. What's very telling is that one of our oldest myths and most important myths for our understanding of ourselves is about how we got technology, and it's that Prometheus brought down fire from Olympus and was punished forever because he did so. This is a dangerous thing, and you need to have a broader sense of a human being and of our place in the world.
But that's the second misused or misunderstood concept. We don't understand anymore that we put people at risk when we give them certain occupations. You used to understand this because the world was much more physically, materially dangerous. Yeah. And now most of the danger is spiritual danger. The scientific process has allowed us to advance to such a place technologically that material danger is mostly mitigated in most areas of life. It's why people could be so afraid of SARS-2, it's why they could be so afraid of COVID, because we were suddenly facing death. And we're a people who very rarely faces death, except in extraordinary accidents. I say extraordinary because they're not ordinary. Yeah. And old age, when it seems it's sort of appropriately in its place. But if we had lived 100 years ago, we all would have lost siblings. We all would have lost parents in youth. We all would have lost friends in youth. Death was so common. When death showed up in 2020, we weren't prepared for it. But because of that, because we've succeeded at defeating material death so successfully in the last century, we've become insensitive to the other kinds of risk. When we empower someone to manipulate the flesh for a living, we're putting their soul at risk.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Now, we need people to do that. And in a society that had a well-ordered sense of its values, we would understand that when we ask someone to be a doctor, we're asking them to put themselves at risk of this particular set of temptations: hubris, callousness. You're going to deal with the body. You're going to see people opened and laid bare, a thing that only God ever saw. God and soldiers are the only people who ever saw it, right? Until the modern era. You're going to deal with death routinely. What is extraordinary for us will be common for you. It'll be very easy to now see people as a commodity. It'll be very easy now to see death as inconsequential. The first time you tell somebody that they've got 3 months to live, I'm sure it's very hard. And the second time, I bet it's very hard. And I bet the 300th time, it's only kind of hard. And there probably comes a point where if you haven't guarded yourself against where those temptations can lead you, where you no longer care about the person in front of you and their humanity anymore at all, because you've dealt with so many people at the moment in which that is broken. I'm not saying that that temptation destroys all doctors. Far from it. I'm saying that a civilization that understands these risks helps guard its doctors against that, helps guard its lawyers against becoming sophists who actually exist to make sure that the law is subverted, not that the law is fulfilled. That understands that when you send soldiers to war, you're asking them to act outside of the natural bounds of humanity. They're going to need something spiritual to guard them in that pursuit, and they're going to need a society that understands what it's asked of them when they return to it. But we've set aside all of these spiritual considerations as a society, and as I say, we've defeated most of the material risks as a society, and so we put people in the way of spiritual harm without equipping them to face those spiritual dangers that they're going to face in that pursuit. And that's how you end up, I would argue, with a Fauci, with someone who does not have any societally imposed guardrails to protect him, and I don't think had any personally imposed guardrails to protect him. And then we put him into an incredibly dangerous position. The most dangerous position of all is power over millions. I mean, that's the place of the deepest temptations.
Yeah, you think about...
That was incredibly well said, and I was listening to you as a physician, a practicing ER physician for so long. The system doesn't even seek that in its doctors anymore. It's not even anything that is discussed or talked about. And the physicians, the infrastructure in which physicians practice medicine specifically impede that kind of approach to patients. Everything about being a doctor in modern times, in modern America, goes against seeing the patient as a human. Everything. There isn't a variable that doesn't do that. One of the things I wrote about very early on during the COVID years, when people said, well, why did I speak up? I said it was actually really easy. What happened to me later wasn't easy, but it was very easy because there was actually a patient in front of me who needed help, and I gave her help. And 2 days later, the CEO of the hospital called me and said I was going to be fired if I ever did that again. And I was shocked. And people said, well, why did you proceed? I said, it wasn't even a choice. What did you mean? Was I not supposed to help her? Like, it was crazy to me that he called me and threatened me. And it was crazy to me that anybody asked me what I would do. But after these years have passed, I've seen the whole system is stacked against the doctor, helping the individual, the payment model, the charting, the pace, everything about it. So it's what you said, but on steroids and very depressing.
Well, and it goes back to the earliest parts of their training, where I think of John Henry Newman in the 19th century. He writes the idea of a university, which is this cri de coeur about what had been happening to universities. One of the crowning achievements of our civilization was the development of the universities. And he said, you know, a university is an institution that professes universal knowledge. That's where it comes from. All these ideas, all these aspects of the intellectual disciplines, they all kind of come together and they have a unity and they have an integrity to them. And our universities, especially in the modern era, on the most important questions, have just thrown their hands up in the air and passed the ball. So they take theology out of the university as if it were no longer an important field of study. Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, made a joke about this when he returned to Regensburg, his old university, and he said, you know, I'm here at a school that has 2 faculties dedicated to something many people say does not exist. The Catholic faculty and the Protestant faculty. 2 faculties for God, and most people think God does not exist. But it's a funny line that has very serious implications, because if a university, and you've seen this increasingly in the modern era, says we're not going to talk about God, we can't know anything about God. I think you can know something about God, but they say, no, we can't know anything, and we can't really know anything about philosophy, so no longer will philosophy be the serious pursuit of wisdom. It's just going to be like, Kant said this, and Hegel said this, and pick what you like, you know, it's a cafeteria. When they stopped taking these things seriously, they focused much more on the harder sciences and on professions, so it became kind of pre-professional training. And so then you produce the Faucis of the world. And the irony is, when the universities lost their verve, and they said, well, we don't really know anything about the most important questions. That was supposed to produce a skepticism and a humility, an epistemic humility in people. But it produced the opposite, right? It produced Fauci saying, well, my school doesn't know anything about God. My school, we don't know anything. So, you know what, it's up to me. And Fauci then becomes his own sort of God without any proper catechesis.
The good news is that the incentive for the universities is about to be flipped, because AI is now providing that information and intelligence that the universities were stripped down to. So if a university is going to survive, if there's a reason to go to college or grad school, what is that reason? It's to form the human with the theology, with the philosophy, with these sort of humanities basics that make you a human being in a way you can't be without that formative education.
That's a great point. And it just forces you to be with other people. Yes. Whereas, you know, a lot of people say the best version of college education is you're learning from the students in many ways more than from the professors. And maybe you're just going to frat parties all the time and wasting your opportunity. But when it works, it's because you're in a place with a person you wouldn't have otherwise met, and you're deeply engaging with ideas and you're learning from one another. And yeah, if you're just supposed to be there to like learn some facts, which the university is probably miseducating you in any way, well, Grok can do that for me right now much better than most universities. That's a great, but that's like a bizarre glimmer of hope. I feel uncomfortable with this glimmer of hope, especially when it comes to schools.
Well, it probably means a lot of universities will die, but the ones that survive will be good.
Even greater hope that most of these universities will die.
Yeah, they'll have to become places where one pursues wisdom instead of just knowledge, and where one pursues humanity instead of just vocation.
That's right. Where a person
knowledge.
becomes a person.
Yeah. That is good.
And we're seeing this a lot, again, in medicine and in law, both. You absolutely can use AI to get 90% of the way there, and then you need, you know, smart human to come in and massage. So that is a hopeful kind of thought that you gave us. But, yeah.
So There's this idea that, Dr. Gold, you in particular have said it a few times today, which is we shouldn't trust the institutions. And I want to push back on that. Not trusting the institutions means not having a nation. A nation is a group of people who have organized themselves around what they have in common that they're willing to fight for, kill for, die for, live for. It's not always the same set of things. There are peculiarities among different nations, but it's always some combination of the same set of things in different measure. We might call it common culture. If you don't have a common culture, you don't have a common nation. There's not a thing that makes us all one something, distinct from all the other people in all the other nations who are out there. It can't just be any one thing. This is my gripe with the so-called heritage Americans who want to post their 23andMe results and who don't actually understand that if someone came over from China on a student visa today and hooked up with some, dyed-in-the-wool American white girl and they had a baby, that baby would now be a daughter of the American Revolution or whatever. Like they don't act. How many grandparents do you before this starts becoming absurd? But I understand what they're getting at. They're pushing against the fact that we don't know what our nation is anymore, and they're trying to find it. It's not exactly a geography. As I've said many times, you could fit the entire European continent within continental America, and there are dozens of languages, dozens of nations, most of whom have fought with each other for thousands of years. And yet somehow, Dutch Protestants in the Pacific Northwest and Spanish Catholics in the south of Florida.
Italian Catholics, sorry. No, you're in New York. In
New
Florida
York,
and
in New
Spanish. You're right.
All managed to be one people for an awfully long time. So it's not geography. It's not exactly race. It's a combination of many things. It's a particular place, particular people, particular set of ideas. It's a culture. And to have a culture, to have something that makes us one something, means that we have to have institutions. And I know it's an unpopular word on the right today. You have to have gatekeepers. You have to have places that we don't perfectly trust, but in which we all can trust somewhat.
You have to have elites.
You have to have elites even. Now, you don't have to have elitism.
Yeah.
Elitism and populism, I think, are both wicked. That's why I always say I'm a lowercase r Republican. Ours constitutionally is to be a Republican system of government, which is an attempt to use representation as a mechanism for balancing between populist ideas on the one hand and elitist ideas on the other hand. You have people who have to lead, but they also have to challenge their constituents. That kind of balance, which is very hard to accomplish, is the only path forward. And I said this to someone today, but I want to put it in front of this group. When a man cheats on his wife, one of the things that makes it very difficult to put that relationship back together, it can be done, but one of the things that makes it very difficult to put that relationship back together is that, and this is a New Testament concept, so indulge me, Dr. Gold, but Paul says that marriage is a picture for our relationship with God in Christ, and so therefore the picture has to remain the picture in order for it to do the work of being a metaphor, right? And in the actual form of this, we're all the bride. Yeah. But in the metaphor, the bride's the bride. The woman has a set of obligations that are distinct from, equal in the level of sacrifice required, but distinct in form from the obligations of the man, whose sacrifice and obligations are also equal in sacrifice, but distinct from those obligations of the woman. The bride gives to the groom trust, fundamentally faith. And in the paradox of marriage, which we've discussed many times, Michael, in settings like this, in fact, in the paradox of marriage, a wife doesn't trust her husband because he's trustworthy. He becomes trustworthy in response to her trust. And a husband doesn't love his wife because she's lovable. She becomes lovable in response to his love. Not perfectly, because it's not magic words, and because we're fallen humans and things go wrong. But the only way that it ever works, it doesn't always work, the only way that it ever works for a man to be trustworthy is when his wife trusts him. And the only way it ever works for the wife to be lovable is when the husband loves her. And so, when a husband cheats on his wife, the only way forward for the marriage is still for the wife to trust him.
Yeah.
Which is now almost impossible. Because it was hard enough to trust him when his trustworthiness hadn't been proven. Now he has proven that he isn't trustworthy. But again, I say, it is the only way forward. Not a perfect way forward, it still might not work. The only way forward. The only way forward for our nation is to trust in institutions again. And after 2020, they slept with our sister. Like they proved themselves untrustworthy. It is almost impossible now to trust in them. And yet, if we cannot find common institutions in whom we can trust, or in which we can trust, if we can't form institutions in which we can trust, if we can't people institutions to make them more trustworthy through our own agency and through our own individual sacrifices, if we can't go be on the school board and go be in the PTA, if you can't go run for Congress, if you can't be in the church, if we can't find our way back to that, if we truly shouldn't trust anyone, then only national divorce remains a possibility, and divorce is terrible.
Yeah, I love this conversation. When I say don't trust, what I should really quote Reagan. I should say trust but verify. I'm not saying that the hospital can't do the right thing for you. The hospital can do the right thing for you if you're an educated consumer and you go in without having given away your agency.
Yeah.
So in the medical space, for example, people have now seen that when they put blind faith in the person in the white coat, that may or may not end out well for them. But it can almost always end well for you if you're an educated consumer and you go and you haven't given away your agency. I'm actually quite optimistic because I like to remind people we're actually not living in China. The truth was available to you if you had wanted to get it. I was just a bedside clinician. I found all the information I needed to find. Apparently I found more than even Fauci did. But I'm pretty optimistic about people being able to go forward and use institutions and improve them from the inside. Now, there's some deep problems in our medical system that I think preclude it from really functioning well. But do I think you as an individual can maneuver yourself within those institutions? Absolutely.
But there's
Absolutely.
there's a temptation, I think, to move past the point you're making, Jeremy, which is, yeah, look, I mean, the institutions, we got to make them work, but they've really violated our trust, but we still need them, but we need agency too. But I think you're making a deeper point than that, which is like there is no nation without institutions.
Correct.
We are social creatures. It's just who we are. We don't live in the woods. We do have agency. Our agency is shaped by all sorts of environmental factors, and so like we're in it together. And it reminds me of the dichotomy that you hear, especially posited by political rationalists. They'll say, well, my country, right or wrong, or my country when right. Which is really just posing two different understandings of how the person fits into society. The obvious answer is, it's my country right or wrong, just like your mom and your dad, or your mom and your dad right or wrong. It's just a fact. It's just, you have a country, you are part of a country. And so the rationalist idea says, well, our patriotism, our love of our country, is really a conclusion that we reach by examining and calculating the good and the bad and just figuring out, according to our own criteria, whether or not our country is deserving of love. But that's not how it actually works. In fact, love of country is the starting point. That's the axiom. That's the premise and the lens through which you can see politics and in which we have to act in politics. So, you're both making excellent points, but the institutions just are. They just exist. And marriage is an institution, and the universities are institutions, and the agencies of government, and the nation itself is a kind of an institution. And so it just has to work, and we have to kind of love it, and we have to engage with it, and we can't write it off, and we can't exempt ourselves from it. And that might be deeply unpleasant and imperfect and annoying and make us feel weak and like we don't have a lot of power, but it's just a fact of who we are and what a nation is.
I think we're all kind of saying the same thing.
We're agreeing loud. We're agreeing
very loudly, yeah.
So the institutions agree, but the institutions are important. They are the infrastructure for our country, and we still have the freedom to pressure the institutions to do better.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
So if the answer is not merely to make the institutions perfect so that the rationalists can trust them, how do we instill the version of love that is separate from the rational evaluation of whether we should or should not be invested in?
Well, the first way you do it is that when you have a kid who's like 2 years old and he's playing with an American flag and he drops it on the ground, you teach him in a loving but firm way that you can't put the flag on the ground. You can never put the flag on the ground. And modern liberal people who may be listening to this are going to laugh at me and say, this is such a stupid, counting how many angels dance on the head of a pin, trivial conversation. It's not. That's one of the most important things you can teach your kid is he can't let the flag touch the ground. Because if he lets the symbol of the country touch the ground, you are teaching him from the earliest age to disrespect the country, that he's above the country, that he doesn't have to care for the country. It's those things. I mean, it's hot dogs on the 4th of July, to carry on with that theme. It's teaching people that when they walk by the bum on the street, they have an obligation to the bum. You're not going to give him money all the time because he's going to go buy drugs or something. But you have an obligation to look him in the eye. You have an obligation to say good morning to him. You have an obligation maybe to ask how he's doing. It's these kind of habits of virtue that you have to inculcate that would, I think, get rid of not only 90% of our political strife, but also would improve the institutions themselves tremendously if people had that unthought sense of mutual obligation.
Yeah, there are two responses to corruption in the church, because it's the institution, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who, when they faced corruption in the church 500 years ago, sought to reform the church, and when they were unable to reform the church, they had a choice of what to do. And what they chose to do was to essentially photocopy the church and move it over and preserve, in their minds, without getting into a war about it here that could last nigh on 30 years, and has lasted at least 10. Yeah, it hasn't lasted at least 10. But what they did is, in their own way, they tried to preserve the church. They tried to preserve the institution parallel to the institution that they thought that they couldn't reform. Conversely, there's a group of people who faced that same institution in the early part of this century when it went through one of its worst moments of corruption in half a millennia. And the vast majority of the people who could not face the problems in the Catholic Church 20 years ago left not the faith. That's because the modern rationalist answer to corruption in the institutions is to abandon the institutions. 500 years ago, the answer to losing faith in the institution was to preserve the institution, whatever form one could, even risking life. I mean, again, I'm not trying to get political about this, but many people died trying to preserve what they thought was the truth of the institution parallel to the institution. The far easier thing is the modern rationalist view.
Yes.
Which is, there's a sex scandal in the church. It was awful. I don't think any practicing Catholic today would tell you that it wasn't a horrible moment in the history of the church. It's not a reason to abandon even the idea of religion itself and the institution.
By the way, Christ does set us up for this, because when he says, "Who do you think I am, Peter?" and he says, "You're the Christ, the anointed of God." And he says, Simon Bar-Jonah, you're now Peter. On this rock I'll build my church. You know, Peter's a real special guy. And Peter, I don't know if you continued reading in the book, denies Christ three times, like 3 seconds later. And so you say, well, that's kind of quirky. Why is it that this guy who gets this real special appointment, why does this guy very overtly deny Christ after Christ tells him he will deny him? And he says, no, I'm not going to deny you. Why is that? That is a preparation for scandal. And that is a preparation to tell people, guys, don't, hold on, you're going to have a lot of turmoil and trouble in this world, but I will never abandon you. You know, be prepared for this. But every time it happens, we're just as surprised as Peter. And the best reaction we can have is to weep bitterly. Actually, many of us do not weep bitterly. We just kind of go our own way.
And I will say the world is better with Lutherans. I'm loath to say this. The world is better with Lutherans than atheists. It is far better to try to preserve the institutions, even in ways that aren't obvious. Mm-hmm. And you might say, well, an even better way would have been. Sure, I'm not.
If we killed all the Lutherans. No, I like Lutherans. They're nice people.
The nicest people.
They're some of my best friends are Lutherans.
Yeah.
I think
but
some.
The world is better with Lutherans. The world isn't better with widespread atheism.
Correct.
Abandoning the institution itself is not a solution. It doesn't pave the way to something better.
Yeah, and it's just not possible. You know, being a social creature, new institutions will form. You know,
well, the truth is, the atheists all form new religious institutions too. Right. It's just a little less obvious.
The religion of public health being the most recent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, full circle.
As a matter of fact. Josh, is there any hope of Fauci himself facing any kind of justice?
That's honestly, I hope so, but I doubt it. And I doubt it because I think Congress is both very distractible and because it's painful to put a public figure who was at some point in the process very deeply admired through that level of pain. And
You mean there would
public
be just
shame.
too many political downsides for the congressman?
Yeah, among others, yes. I mean, frankly, John Bolton has not been, a major public presence to the average American in several years, and yet I feel it's pretty difficult for members of Congress to view him as someone who needs to be punished, or
agree.
for that matter, anybody in law enforcement.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does color my view of a Fauci prosecution, where the things that I could say about Anthony Fauci would cause the stream to go down and me to go to confession. But even so, I think of the Bolton prosecution, which I didn't like. I don't like the idea of John Bolton going to prison. Whether you love Bolton, a lot of people hate Bolton, but I still have a great affection for his screaming at the United Nations, among other things. But I don't like the idea of this older man who's worked in government his whole life going to jail for, I don't want to call it a minor offense, but a widespread offense where most people really don't go to jail, and an offense that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden committed to extremes that they'll never be punished for. With Fauci, the consequences were much, much more severe. What he did was much more invidious, and to me, the Congress really ought to do something about that, even if it's not jail time, even if it's a fine. They have the ability. Well, I guess it would be up to a prosecution and a judge, but they would have the ability to fine him $50,000.
Can I speak to this for a minute? There's two pieces of this that are interesting. One is the political question. The second the Democrats raided Mar-a-Lago, it became impossible that we were ever going to get justice for COVID.
Yeah, right.
Because Donald Trump was the president of the United States. I know it's impolitic to say so. I know that we're supposed to say, somehow we're supposed to rewrite our memories and Joe Biden was the president the whole time, Donald Trump turned the country over to Fauci.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump let Fauci persuade him to shut the country down. It's the worst moment of the first Trump presidency and the Trump presidency to date. I think it will be.
Yeah. I hope it's remembered.
It will be remembered as the worst moment of
I
Trump
hope it will
presidency.
be. Yeah.
In the same way that Karen Bass winning the primary for mayor of LA a few short weeks ago precludes there ever being justice for the Palisades fire fiasco.
Yeah.
That once you've made a political decision to re-embrace the person who is in power in these moments, you've essentially forsworn ever being able to pursue a real reckoning for the thing that happened. And I want to say that that's a shame, because I don't think that we've said enough this evening to capture the true scope of the societal damage done by our government's reaction to COVID. It's so easy in shorthand to blame COVID for things. The only thing you can blame COVID for is that people got sick and died.
Yeah.
Every other consequence is a consequence of government. And media, and medicine, the medical practice in this country, and culture. And the damage is the most consequential event of our lifetime. It dwarfs 9/11 in terms of its consequences for our society. We will be dealing with it for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
It's impossible to fully understand, because we're all too damn old, the actual impact of this event on Gen Z.
Oh, yeah.
That what for us was, well, in Tennessee, it was like 6 or 8 weeks. In California, 2.5 or 3 years.
Still going on, actually, in California.
I've got two sons. It absolutely changed the trajectory
Of their
of
lives.
their lives. Unbelievable. I am kind of with you. I think that the harm that Fauci did to our nation and the world it's like on a Stalin level. Like, it's incredible, like the effect that it happened. And I'm also not a big fan of putting people in prison that for nonviolent offenses. Like, that's just a fact. I think that that's the
As someone who was
approach.
put in prison for a
As someone who's
nonviolent
put in
offense.
prison, like, I'm very against that. Plus, he's old; he's 85. But there needs to be kind of a national reckoning.
Yeah.
And it is true that Trump just handed the keys to the kingdom. Part of our mission with what I do is to not allow anybody to think that God, doctors are demigods. I don't understand, though, politically why the states don't go after him. There's crimes, there's rampant crimes all over the place, and I'm hoping Florida goes through. I do think it's important to the national healing, to improving our institutions and our national story of ourselves, of who we are as a people, that there's a reckoning and accounting. We've referenced religion here a lot. I mean, this is how I live. So when Joseph had his brothers stand before him, he wanted to reconcile with his brothers. But before he could reconcile with his brothers, he had to test and see, were they the same or were they different? Had they changed? Had their hearts changed? Would they do the same thing? Judaism is called teshuvah. Teshuvah. Did they do teshuvah, which is kind of like repentance? What it really means is if you're put in the same situation, would you make the same decision or a different decision? So one of the ways marriages can heal is if the man who committed infidelity, if he's in the same exact situation, would he make a different decision? And if he makes a different decision, then he's done teshuvah, he's a different person, and he moved forward in harmony. Well, we haven't done that with Fauci. We haven't had any kind of national apology, national reckoning.
Or with any of the
same situation.
institutions.
So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not really looking to put the guy in jail. He's 85 years old. I think he's been destroyed, in my humble opinion, as a human. Watching a narcissist have to watch his world implode and the respect that he thought he enjoyed implode is a serious punishment for a person who's a narcissist. But there needs to be something for national healing so that we can feel the same way Joseph did not just open his arms to his brothers. He had to see that they weren't going to sell their brother Benjamin out. We have to see that there's been teshuvah. We have to see that as a nation. That's what I think.
But one of the issues is we still don't agree on it. So Trump obviously bears ultimate responsibility as president because the buck stops with the president. But you could tell Trump had sort of changed his opinion relatively early in the COVID process. However, once you set up the COVID task force, the worst job he could have ever given to poor Mike Pence, it's like the most thankless job in politics. And Fauci becomes the face of it, and Dr. Birx and all the rest of it. That started to have a life of its own. And once you establish that standard, it empowered the states to do whatever they wanted to do. And so you have some of the Republican governors, DeSantis and others, start to reopen their states relatively quickly. And California is going to still be locked down for the parts of the state that don't burn to the ground until 2052. And so one of the problems is, even if you say, okay, the conservatives kind of figured it out relatively early at the federal level and at the state level. But to this day, the Democrat governors, the Democrat apparatchiks, the Democrat voters will not tell you that anything went wrong other than that Trump didn't go far enough or something like that. So there's really just a fundamental failure to reconcile with the facts of what that was.
Well, far be it from me to mix the religious metaphors, but I think this is why we need to go through this ceremony of scapegoating Fauci. We need to demonstrate to the left, to the people who don't really understand how much of a bag of lies they were sold, that this is in fact what happens when you choose to trust people who claim to be the science, right? But if we sort of turn inward for a second, to me, the lesson that needs to be learned, and I think this is where you were going, Jeremy, is if I look back to myself in February, March 2020, I was a lot more open to what Mike Pence was telling me needed to be done. I think we all were. And the reason for that is fear. We were actually afraid that tens of millions of people or more were going to die from this thing. And we were willing to trust those in authority to save us from that. And that was the mistake that I made. I think that's the mistake that tens or hundreds of millions of people made, was to defer our own judgment out of fear long enough that the government grabbed what we had given them and then held on to it in California for years.
Right, because it's not even a fear for ourselves. I never at any moment during COVID felt even the slightest modicum of fear for myself. I'm a pretty young, healthy guy, not that I ever work out or sometimes don't eat right. But actually, maybe I should have felt feared for my own life. But
I was worried for you.
Yeah, I know. I was reasonable enough. But I did have a little of the political fear. Gosh, if there's a 5% chance that 3 million people die, that is an unacceptable risk. And I'm sure the president was feeling this. I mean, I think anybody would have in his situation. But then that's why these prediction models were so nefarious.
Okay, so first of all, the prediction models were completely false and inaccurate. But this is where I understand. You were correct not to feel fear. Yeah. Let me just tell you what the facts showed in real time. In real time, there was no risk. There was no lethal, serious risk unless you were frail and elderly. You needed 4 comorbid conditions, according to the CDC in 2020. You needed 4 comorbid conditions to even approach anything that was genuinely dangerous. So they knew the facts. That's why I do think something has to happen symbolically around Fauci, because he knew the facts. You might not know the CDC facts, but I was very familiar with them. And this is another thing that sparked me that I want to say about specifically something that Fauci did, because you said you started maybe being wondering about other people, right? Yeah. That thought never occurred to you with any other disease. That thought was put into your head because of Fauci and this feeling of collectivism, which comes from the public health services, that they think collectivism is more important than the individual. It's very anti-American. So what do you say to this? Walensky, who is the head of the CDC, in August of 21, she was on CNN, and she said that the shots can no longer prevent transmission, which of course we knew. I watched it in real time. She said they don't stop transmission. So that's what she says in August of 21. Then how come a month later, Fauci then says, it isn't only about you. There's a social responsibility that we all have. So you felt that, even as a person who's really into individual rights, you felt that because you were told by a person in a tremendous authority and power that you should feel guilty over something else. And as far as I can tell, that's new in America.
Yeah, well, look, I wasn't concerned that I was going to spread it exactly, but my fear was that if some measures aren't taken, even absent my own behavior, which, I guess I'd be fine sitting at home and, I don't know, doing my work from. That's not true. I lasted 24 hours, and Jeremy and I were both back.
Did you feel that during swine flu? Did you feel that? I mean, I'm an ER doctor. Did you feel that during bird flu? Did you feel that during swine flu? Did you feel that during Ebola?
No,
this was put into you, that idea of trying to do the right thing, of mercy, of compassion, that was put into your brain specifically by a person who had a collectivism, totalitarian, authoritarian.
But I guess the only reason I push back a little bit on the sort of ideological standpoint is, we have a very individualist view of American history now. I don't know that was really always the case. I mean, you think of Washington in the Continental Army. He was mandating smallpox inoculations that killed like 10% of the people that got them. So, a lot of the language around collectivism versus individualism, a lot of that emerges in the Cold War. And obviously, we don't want to be commies or anything like that. But there has been a care for the common good and things like that.
Smallpox, I'm not going to let you get away with it. Smallpox is 30% mortality. COVID was known to the CDC.
But this is my point. This is what I'm getting to is, yes, that I'm sure was known to a lot of these doctors, and there were all those bogus models. But my reasoning is that the reason I was worried about the millions of people dying is not because Fauci brainwashed me into having care for other people or into some collectivist kind of vision, even though I'm sure he holds one. It was much more particular than that. It is because scientists and public health officials told me this thing was going to kill millions of people. Had they told me it's going to be swine flu and some people are going to die, but mostly you're going to have a bad tummy ache, I wouldn't have worried about it as much. It was because of the enormity of the consequences that they told me. And the fact that those models were bogus is a massive and particular scandal. You can't just, to my mind, you can't just excuse them by saying they have a bad ideology. They got real numbers and predictions dead wrong, and they should be held to account. This is kind of why I want my pound of flesh. Even if Fauci doesn't go to jail, to your point on scapegoating, we kind of need a scapegoat for this because it was such a trauma for so many years.
Well, to be a scapegoat, one has to be innocent.
Yes, exactly.
Fauci is not innocent.
Yes. The scapegoat is the victim onto whom we cast our own sins. He sinned. He's the guy. He wronged us at the very least.
So because of the city in which we reside, he gone and done it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I look at Gen Z and I blame COVID more than any other factor for the problems that we see happening in Gen Z. Even the problem of rampant transgenderism. We took them in the most socially formative years of their life, locked them behind screens at the very moment that the trans ideology was prevalent on TikTok. At the very moment that the anti-Semitic nationalist sentiment was really rising through people like Nick Fuentes on the right online. So those are, at any given moment, there are these little things that have purchase on the internet. We put a dart in one moment, and for 3 years, the most important 3 years of the lives of anyone who was between the ages of 13 and 20, or 13 and 18 certainly, said you cannot leave your house. The only way you can interact with other humans, the only way you can get an education, the only way you can be entertained, the only way that you could talk to a girl, the only way you can talk to a friend is through this screen where one group of people is telling you to cut your breasts off and one group of people is telling you to hate the Jews. And then we're shocked that 30% of them think that they're in the wrong body, and 30% of them think that that the Jews control the world and drive every nefarious purpose that happens. We, including the 4 people in this room, although the 4 people in this room didn't as much as anybody. You and I were back. You're right. 24 hours.
Yeah.
I sent people home from the Daily Wire. Michael and I were back in the office 24 hours.
I said, I can't take it anymore. Sorry, I'm coming back to work.
Yep, I'll see you there.
He said, yeah, I'm already there.
You risked your entire career, became one of the most persecuted people in the country and one of the most canceled people in the country, in part because of your pushback against it. Josh literally sued the federal government to prevent the mandates, which I want to talk a little bit more about in a moment. And yet even we have blood on our hands because we didn't do damn near enough to push back against this when you consider the actual destruction of an entire generation and a half of young people who, when I say we're going to be dealing with this for the rest of our lives, it's because 2 years to me was 5% of my life at the time, and 2 years to them was more than 10% of their lives, and the most important 10% of their lives. And we drove them into the arms of these demonic forces on the internet at the time. You lost faith in the institutions. They've never had faith in institutions.
Yeah.
They had faith in their parents, and when it was time for their parents to hand them off to the institutions carte blanche failed them. Like 4 pastors in America had the nerve to open their churches.
Pastor McCoy.
And, it is the shame of not just a generation, it's the shame of a century, what we allowed to take place during 2020. And they got to sit at home and watch those same scientists. You raised this question earlier about scientists are also supposed to take into consideration the good of the individual, the good of the country, the good of society, well, they did. Because they concluded that it was not okay for you to see your grandmother die, but it was okay for you to burn down police precincts in mobs
They wrote
to combat racism.
a letter by forget how many public health professionals saying that the BLM riots were acceptable because white supremacy is a cause of and contributing factor to COVID. They actually wrote that.
They actually wrote that.
Yes, and I remember on the point of the churches, a buddy of mine, Southern Baptist, said it's not so bad really with the churches closed because the church isn't it's not just a place, it's like it's a community, it's out there, it's mystical and spiritual. And to me, this is a real symptom of modernity, which is that we abstract ourselves away from our bodies. You're really seeing this in the parasocial reactions online. The whole transgender ideology fundamentally takes us out of our bodies or endeavors to take us out of our bodies. But I pointed to him, I said, but look, I'm Catholic, so we have a sacramental theology. For us, the physical stuff really matters. And I remember there were plenty of Catholic parishes that failed on this.
Yep.
And I remember in LA, of all places, there was a priest, I think Dominican. The Dominicans are well formed, but he was kind of a lefty guy. I mean, he was like half a communist sometimes in his sermons. But this guy, 92, 93 years old.
What are you talking about?
Do you know? Yeah.
I can't think of his name.
He
was
he kept. I remember I wanted confession, and this priest, I didn't have to ask. He was hearing confessions. They wouldn't let him really open the church, so he was hearing them through a scrim out the side door because this guy knew. Even with kind of liberal politics, but even with this guy knew, well, hold on, if I really believe what I say, I believe the people need the sacrament.
The only place I'm going to push on you is when you say even in LA, because John MacArthur on the Protestant side also.
Yeah, MacArthur famously did, yeah.
LA is a great place for Christian warriors. And the reason is because it's LA.
Yeah, because you're beleaguered all the time.
Because you're beleaguered all the time. Yeah. To be a Catholic priest in LA, to be a Protestant pastor in LA, just to be a Christian in LA, you got to mean it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not just comfortable.
Yeah, who called it Gomorrah by the Sea?
Don Henley.
Room. Oh, yeah. Don Henley through you is where I got it.
Me,
Yeah.
sometimes quoting Don Henley, and other times just stealing the quote for myself. Josh, you sued the government. And one of the things that, having gone through that process of making the decision to sue the administration and not to comply with the vaccine mandate when it came down, I learned something important about human nature and politics in that experience. And it's that you get almost no credit for wins when people didn't pay any consequence for the policy that you defeated. So there's this amazing thing where, the Daily Wire makes this decision that we're not going to comply with the mandate. We're going to sue the government. The hour that it became possible to sue the government, we sued the government. With the help of Harmeet Dillon, with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom. And it was in no way guaranteed that we were going to prevail. We were not the only business that joined in those lawsuits, but we were one of the leaders in it. And not guaranteed at all that we would succeed, not guaranteed at all that our company could survive if we failed because we weren't complying with the mandate, which, if you remember the fee structure at the time for what was the consequences of doing that, it was like you could, a business our size could make it like 5 days before you were bankrupt. Almost any company would be bankrupted within a few weeks.
It would have cost us several $1 billion if we had lost.
Several $1 billion with a B had we lost. But after we won,
Nothing.
Everybody wants to just throw this Ben Shapiro tweet. It was like, you should get the vaccine, dummies or something. I don't remember the tweet exactly, but people love to just throw it in your face, like because of one thing that you wrote on Twitter one time, you're the problem. And I used to tell people, anytime I would see that tweet get thrown around, I'd be like, are you vaccinated? Do you have a job? You're welcome. And no one could see it. And they couldn't see it because we won. If the thing had gone into effect and people had been lined up against their will and forced to actually decide whether or not they were going to work or violate their consciences, I think people would have seen what we did for what it was, which was took an enormous risk in defense of what we believe.
Well, it wasn't just the financial risk, which would have obviously bankrupted us many times over, but it was also the political risk, which is when you're suing the federal government, the government that is tasked with auditing you, the government that is tasked with regulating you and your labor relations and all the rest. I mean, you are putting such a target on your back, where if you win, you continue to have you have an even bigger target on your back, actually. So it was a having not had to do very much for the lawsuit part of it, other than risking my paycheck, I guess. I have a little objectivity looking at it. It was a gutsy thing to do. It was, and maybe a reckless thing to do.
I feel like it's the most important thing that we did in the history of the Daily Wire, and very few people even remember that we did it. Again, because we won, because there was no one ever had to actually pay the bill, and that's fine. That's the cost of doing business. But it is like, for us in our life at that time, it was like making a decision to jump off of a mountain.
Yes. Yes.
And then, because we didn't splat on the ground, most people forget that it even happened.
I remember sitting in the room with you, terrified that you were about to make this existential decision that we were not going to follow this mandate, and we would fight it until the end. But that was also really, really good motivation to go and win, which we, of course, did. I'll tell you what I think was the most difficult and heartbreaking part of that whole process was that between the time Biden announced the policy and it was actually published and could be challenged, the number of private businesses in the U.S. that decided to implement the rule anyway, I think doubled in that time. So there were a lot of people that ultimately had to choose between their job and getting a vaccine. They didn't want to, though we still, I think it was about 60% of employees at the time the stay was issued were still allowed to go to work without having been vaccinated. But then do you remember once we had won and we were celebrating the victory, immediately there were people in the healthcare sector who were criticizing us for not winning the legal victory for them because there was a separate rule that applied to people working in medicine. And we said, well, sorry, we're not doctors. We have no standing to sue, but please go sue, for that. we took this risk. Please go take that
Jeremy's
risk yourself.
concierge doctor. That could have been the we're not in that space yet. We're in
Jeremy's
cigars,
doctors.
chocolates,
We tried
media.
though. It went up to the Supreme Court and it lost.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially, which was a tragedy because even if you accepted the lie that there was a risk of transmission or it was a risk to patients, even if you accepted that, you were forcing vaccination on what is essentially 20% of our GDP. So you're saying that most of those people don't even ever see a patient. I mean, you're talking about janitorial staff, you're talking about accounting staff, you're talking about secretaries, remote offices, all of that. And the Supreme Court said, yep, you can mandate them.
This is where agency matters an awful lot, because it was amazing that we were literally celebrating the win, and people were like, "I'm a nurse, and why didn't you win for me?" And all I can think is this is the thing about agency. We did what we could do.
Correct.
There was nothing we could do about that other problem. As you say, Josh, we had no standing. But also, why are you upset with us instead of you doing something? Now, I understand that we had some resources that other people did, although nothing like the resources if we had lost.
Yeah.
Nothing like the resources to
Then we
absorb
wouldn't
the
have had
loss.
any resources at
We
all.
had no
had we
resources
lost,
at all. But people have to take action. And to your point, some did, and sadly they lost. The only unpopular opinion I have about the vaccine, you brought up the mortality rates of smallpox in the 1700s versus COVID in the 2020s. But I think there's another component to Washington inoculating the troops against smallpox. And it's that the commander-in-chief has the right to make the military do things that they don't want to do. And there were, I think that it's horrible that people were driven out of the United States military over the COVID vaccine, because I think it was unjust. There was no efficacy. I think
It was stupid.
It was stupid. I think they knew there was no efficacy, but it is actually the job of the soldier to take the shot when the commander-in-chief gives the order for you to take the shot. It is the only, military service is one of the only places where you do set aside certain rights.
Correct.
In order to do it. It doesn't make the order right. I oppose the order.
I totally agree. But by the way, there were people, few and far between, but there were people who stood up with personal agencies. So we represented a lot of we represented 400 Kaiser workers, including many nurses. And also we supported lawsuits on behalf of the COVID recovered college students and COVID recovered soldiers. So you are correct. I agree with you. Military, it's really a different beast. It was totally unfair. I worked with a colonel who had fought the anthrax shots in around the year 2000. He was amazing. Shout out to him. Tom Rumford, Buzz Rumford, he's amazing. But yes, the military is a different beast. That was a really good point. Legally, and we do accept that as a society. But there were people who stood up, and I feel your pain as other people like, why didn't you help me here? And you're like, well, why didn't you do it yourself? None of this is easy.
None of it's easy.
Why didn't you produce a better vaccine? Well, I don't know. I don't work in that. I don't have any hard skills. I don't know.
Yeah.
One of the problems that I feel out there as a direct result of what happened in 2020 is because we now have this distrust of medicine generally, I think, and you feel it very specifically in distrust of vaccines.
Yeah.
Help us as a doctor to sort of parse this. Help us to understand, why do we oppose the COVID vaccines, and why do we not allow that to become opposition to all vaccines? And how do we know what is a vaccine that we should oppose and what is a vaccine that we should not oppose?
And how do I get the nanotechnology robots that they inject
Out of your body?
my body?
Listen, there was a lot of things about the COVID shot that indicated it was an entirely different beast than ordinary vaccine. Just scientifically, there was just a lot of things. From a political perspective, you cannot roll out something so fast without all kinds of legal exceptions. It doesn't make any sense to an ordinary thinking person that you haven't checked for fertility, reproduction, teratogenicity, oncogenicity, cancer effects over years, animal studies. It was just such a different category that I don't even group them in the same category as vaccines. However, for example, and just for full disclosure, I had no dog in this fight. I had taken whatever shots were required of me, as did my children, all of that stuff. I just want to say that, not criticizing one side or the other, but I personally had no dog in this fight. However, I've done a lot of research since the COVID shot, and I'm very alarmed at what I just took for granted. Water's wet is what I never thought about vaccines. The truth is they have not been placebo tested. They have not been tested against a true placebo.
Right.
That's shocking and alarming. The other thing that I do think Secretary Kennedy has brought out to bear is how bad is this thing that we're vaccinating for? We've seen Americans get into a tizzy over measles. Many of us, if we didn't live through an era of measles, or certainly our parents did,
Yep.
it's really not a serious disease most of the time. Please, my God, I always am a doctor. I know there's exceptions to everything. But in general, this is not a thing that we should get hyperbolic over. It's basically, did you ever see the Brady Bunch episode that
Right.
went around?
Yeah,
I mean, it was like, and that's true. It's kind of a mild thing. And as Secretary Kennedy pointed out, vitamin A, very helpful if you're going to get really sick. So I think the distrust is valid because they have not been placebo tested. And the numbers of vaccines we're giving is so large, and the numbers of vaccines in the pipeline add a zero to it. So there's 72 shots given by the time from birth to till age 18. That's a lot. 72 shots. It's not 72 diseases. 72. I think there's 13 or 14 diseases, but a lot of them are pretty mild. Measles, chickenpox, et cetera. And there's about 70 more that are in the pipeline. I think this is the valid distrust, is that people open their eyes and said, well, why haven't there been placebo tested things? And how bad is the disease? How bad is the risk? And I want to point out to everybody that when you accept a risk of a medication, when you're sick, your risk assessment is very different than if you're healthy. And you're giving vaccines to healthy people. So the safety factor has to be virtually 100%.
Yeah.
If you have cancer, you have heart disease, whatever, you're willing to accept a risk. But if you've got a healthy 18-year-old who's perfectly healthy, that thing better be really safe. And it is taken out. Vaccines are the only product, as you guys know, in America that has been taken out of the litigation system.
Yeah.
I think these are very valid reasons why people should be skeptical, at least ask the questions.
Well, this is certainly why I thought that it was fundamentally wrong to make young healthy people in particular, be vaccinated for COVID. And especially when they started trying to vaccinate kids, like actual children. There is approaching zero risk of mortality in those age cohorts. And so since we didn't know what the mortality rate of the vaccine would be, it was novel, it was new, you can't say that the vaccine is safer for the child in that circumstance than COVID, because we knew that COVID presented an almost 0% mortality risk to those children. And we did not yet know, I'm going to talk about in the earliest days, what the potential mortality risk of the vaccine was. If it was anything, it was probably greater than the mortality rate
It's not if anything. It absolutely was great. It was absolutely.
Well, we know that now, but I'm saying like on day one, it was hypothetical.
Respectfully, as a thinking sentient physician, it was entirely predictable because your mortality was virtually zero. I mean, people are afraid to say that on air, but the number of children who died from COVID who did not have serious underlying pathology to begin with, typically metastatic cancer, sometimes morbid obesity, was a statistical zero.
Nothing.
Statistical zero. And here's another
And that we did know before the vaccine
So
came out.
you can't give something new. And the other thing is doctors started behaving entirely differently. All of a sudden, right, the same doctors who said to you last week, your wife is pregnant or she's going into the OBGYN, and they're like, don't drink the wine. Oh, don't have a puff of the cigarette. No, don't do that. Don't even have sushi. Oh, God forbid sushi, right? Roll up your sleeves, the new stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So I was very alarmed at the doctors all of a sudden were behaving not like doctors. Doctors are the most risk-averse people as a profession. All of a sudden, the new stuff, give it to me. That was very strange. To me, it was very Stepford Wives. I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
So,
I saw just the widespread sort of denial of all of these factors that you're describing. The fact that kids were basically at no risk, the fact that they hadn't really tested these vaccines and they were causing myocarditis and pericarditis and all this. I was speaking to someone I know, very liberal, and she said, my friend's dad died of COVID. I said, oh, really? When did he have COVID? Well, he died in April, and he had COVID back in December. I said, he died and how'd that work? I said, well, it's just that bad. And I said, okay. Did he do anything else in the meantime? She goes, yeah, well. I said, she wasn't telling me. I said, did he get the shot? She goes, yeah. I said, when did he get the shot? She goes, about a week before. I said, I was trying to be gentle. I said, do you think wouldn't that maybe suggest that the shot, she goes, oh, no, the shot can't possibly do any of that. No, it just shows you how lingering the effects of COVID are, that 6 months later, they couldn't believe, it's basically as blaring a sign as possible to say the guy had a heart attack because of the shot. Couldn't accept it.
You know,
This is what
I
we're
always kind of like
experiencing.
I always kind of like General Petraeus, you know, even though he gets a bad rap now.
Yeah.
But there's this moment I remember when a guy down in Florida burned a Quran, and General Petraeus at the time said, you know, this is wrong. Do not burn Qurans. You're going to get our troops in the Middle East killed.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a jerk thing to do to burn a Quran.
Yeah.
I'm against it. I ain't for it. I'm against our troops getting killed. But the reason we have those troops is to defend our First Amendment.
Yeah.
Like that's the first reason we have them. That if you're prioritizing the list of reasons of rights that they protect, that's one of them. And so I don't want anything to do with the kind of guy that burns a Quran.
Yeah.
Total asshole. An American exercising their constitutional rights, if that gets our troops in the Middle East killed,
Yeah.
then our troops in the Middle East need to smash everyone. Like,
Yeah.
your job now is to do whatever you have to do to stop that. There was a thing that happened during COVID. You talk about doctors changing. Do you remember the entire movement of doctors suddenly wanted to be protected from patients?
Oh, yeah.
This was a
right.
huge movement during COVID of doctors not wanting to interact
Yeah.
with patients because it put them at risk. And I had the exact same, of course, the Petraeus thing had happened a decade or more earlier. And I remember thinking at the time, this is exactly that. Like, the job of our troops is to die if necessary to defend our First Amendment. The job of doctors and nurses is to put yourself at risk
Yeah.
for patients.
This was a drastic sea change, and it was real because I was in Los Angeles for 20 years, and 13 years or so before COVID, it was 7 years before COVID, 2013, I think, was when the Ebola scare came, and the hospital I was working at was the receiving hospital for Los Angeles. If anybody by accident came all the way from Africa, landed in LA, they were concerned about Ebola, they were bringing them to my hospital. So we got Ebola training, okay? So I have a direct comparative experience. The change in the medical profession between that experience and COVID was night and day. Nobody ever thought the doctor, our safety, how we would feel. It would never have occurred to us.
Yeah.
I'm very worried about this kind of shift in who Americans are.
Well, that's right. That we, the funny thing about, and this has been observed by everyone from C.S. Lewis to, us.
Yeah.
I was going to go backwards the other way, but I couldn't get old enough because I've been on a plane today. I'm dead.
Yeah. Just throw in G.K. Chesterton,
G.K.
Hilaire Belloc.
everybody
It's
from-
all they kind of
C.S.
blend
Lewis to
together.
G.K.
Yeah.
Chesterton to Pope Pius the Third,
Yeah.
all said. No, there is this very American. It comes to us as part of our British heritage. This belief that when you tend to the individual, you are tending to the collective. That the thing that is in the common good is looking after the individual. That tends to redound to the common good. Now, atomizing the individual does not redound to the common good.
Yeah.
But tending to the rights of the individual redounds to the common good. Tending to the rights of the collective almost never redounds to the rights of the individual. This is one of the great paradoxes in life. And that's the thing that COVID robbed, I think, from the country, is the idea that you have a duty to, it's funny, you read that Fauci quote, I think you read it actually, the quote about, we have it's not just for you, it's for society, social, yeah. And it sounds like he is saying that we have a duty to our fellow man, but it's actually the opposite. He's actually saying that you don't matter and your rights should be subordinated to the rights of the common man, the common good. The thing that, my argument is that's never correct in the common good, almost never in the, I can't say never, almost never is that actually in the common good. The thing that we've lost is the belief that you have a duty to your fellow man standing next to you, to an actual man.
Yeah.
Not mankind, but to the person next to you. That it is sort of the job, it is your job if you walk by a burning building and you hear screams from inside. It is sort of your duty as a human to go in. If you're in a building and it catches fire, it's your duty to get out.
Yeah, right.
You have a responsibility. You got a kid at home. It is your responsibility to protect your life. It's not selfish
Yeah.
to flee when the building catches fire.
Well, this is also
But it is selfish not to go back in the building if you hear screams.
yeah, right.
And that is a part of the spiritual armor that I say has been robbed from people. And if you're going to continue putting people in these positions, like being doctors, nurses, lawyers, putting people in positions to have responsibility for the well-being of others, and you haven't equipped them with those fundamental ideas, then you're setting them up morally to fail, which then leads to moments like today where we say, well, the common good is in collapse. The common good needs to be tended. And some purveyors of the idea of the common good will say, we've become too individual. We've become too concerned for the rights of the individual. No. It's not our concern for the rights of the individual that has led to this. It's our radical individuality. It's our radical selfishness as individuals.
Yeah, and they just fundamentally misunderstand what the common good is. For Fauci to claim the mantle of the common good just means he is not familiar with what the common good means, going back to antiquity throughout the entire Western tradition, which is that it is actually to conflate it with collectivism or communism or whatever. The common good does have a meaning. The common good is a good which is not diminished when shared. A pizza is a good that is diminished when shared. If you have a piece of pizza, I have less pizza now for myself. Justice is not diminished when shared.
That's right.
Justice actually grows when it is shared. And the sort of thing that Fauci did, or some of the pretending do-gooders or collectivists or what have you, what they're doing is assaulting justice. I mean, when Fauci lies and admits that he lies and then keeps lying, he is diminishing the common good in a very real way and perverting what that has always meant in the Western tradition to its perfect inverse.
Dr. Gold, before we leave, would you tell me about this book?
Yes, this is a delightful book that explains what really happened during the COVID years in a way that children can enjoy and adults can enjoy in an easy fashion, right? So much of what happened to us is complicated and long and detailed, but fundamentally what went wrong was our substitution of our personal agency, where we gave authority to government figures or media figures or people in white coat figures, and the government in lieu of what God set up, which is the family, right? So one of the things we didn't have a chance to talk about is why were children being allowed to disobey or go around or circumvent what their parents wanted during the COVID years. They set up, places where you can get shots. Not only did you not need your parents' permission, you didn't even have to tell your parents. So for me, this was very much, the COVID years were very, there was about local jurisdictions that did that. And they set them up on school grounds. And the kids did not get the permission and they didn't have to inform them. And the kids could be as young as 14. So for me, the COVID years were very much an attack on the family. It was an attack on God. Yeah. And so that's why I called it The Plot Against the Kids. What happened during COVID in a way that you can easily understand in about 10 minutes.
That's amazing.
All your favorite characters like Wizard, Fauci.
Well, and this art is unbelievable.
Very subtle.
Yeah,
very subtle art on there. Yeah, this just sort of demon golem Fauci. Really, I can't wait to read this.
It's a striking resemblance.
Yeah, you are going to get back to me, tell me what your kids said.
Yeah, I will. It'll be tonight.
Kids love it. But this is what really happened. It was a takedown. It was an attempted takedown of our way of life, our Judeo-Christian family way of life. The parents stand in. God has, said that the parents stand in for God in their family. I was very offended that we were suddenly allowing the government to stand in for the parents.
But that's also how institutions are supposed to work, and that's probably a good place to end the show is with taking this idea of personal agency in the institution and what connects these two things. And what connects it is a kind of subsidiarity, right? It's really that you have to be a part of the institutions. And that really means not in the same way that the problem of COVID is that we look to these distant experts and elites to rule over us who had no real connection back to us. And in fact, in order for them to do it, they had to destroy all the institutions closest to us. They had to destroy the relationship between you and your individual doctor. They had to destroy the relationship between students and teachers. They had to destroy the relationship between
you and your kids.
You don't fix that by trying to go to Washington, D.C. and change the federal government.
That's right.
The federal government's going to have to be changed.
But local.
But you have to take the steps. You fix almost everything in life by first fixing yourself and then fixing the people in your immediate orbit, by serving in the institutions that you can touch. For some people, we're friendly with Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz can speed dial the president of the United States. He needs to fix Washington. And you need to vote for people who can do that. Very few of us can call the President of the United States. Very few of us can put forward legislation. Very few of us sit on powerful committees within the United States Senate. What is it for us to do? Well, yes, vote, but not just gripe about politics online. The thing that we can do is teach your kids not to let the flag touch the ground.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor, it's act out of your conscience for the well-being of your patients, even if that's not in vogue, and put on the kind of armor that we've talked about being missing from the profession throughout the course of the evening. If you're, it is go to the school board, it is be on the PTA, it's actually invest in your community. We actually have to get out from behind these screens, which have atomized us all. And you have to engage in the actual physical, geographical communities in which you live. That's where your agency is actually exercised. And listen, for some people, that's going to take them to Washington, D.C. I mean, for some people, that's going to take them, but for most of us, that's not where it's going to take us. But it is going to take all of us out of our front door. If you don't ever walk out of your front door, you're not fixing the problem. You're just complaining about the problem.
Yeah.
And you will be ruled over by those powerful elites in those distant lands who don't actually care about you. You're only a number to them. You're only a source of power to be wielded and ruled. And honestly, that's if the good guys win.
Yeah, right.
That's actually just a fact of the relationship between a person and a government, between a citizen and a government. It is an abstract relationship. I was talking to somebody this morning who's going through a terrible personal tragedy, and their family is not on their side because of a political disagreement. When I say a political disagreement, I mean they literally disagree about national politics, and that's caused such a rift in their family that they can't support my friend in his time of true personal loss and need. And all I can think anytime I encounter something like that is how abstract are politics. For the most part, not always, for the most part, and not just, when I say the most part, I mean the vast super majority, the overwhelming majority of the time, politics remains abstract from the average person in the average moment of their lives. And your family does not. Your family is real and physical and tangible. Is there a time when political division should cause a family to fracture? Of course, there are times when politics stops being abstract and becomes urgent. An extreme example would be the Civil War. We famously say it put brother against brother, and you say yes, because the actual fundamental sacred ties that bind a people together were ripped asunder. And war sets aside the normal conventions of life. War makes it permissible morally to do the most immoral things. Yeah. Take the life of the person next to you, right? So yes, there are these anomalous moments where that's true. Disagreeing about how good or bad Donald Trump is not cause to let a family be.
Should he have really said that about the TV show host? And you think, guys, I thought it was funny. It was kind of mean. You thought it was bad. We're like cousins, right? We're like, you're my dad or my son or my whatever. Give me a break.
Yeah, you know that one of us is going to carry your casket at your funeral, right, Mom, and it isn't Kamala Harris. Yeah. She ain't going to be there. It's not going to be her. It's me. These are the things that matter. These are the places where we have to wield our agency and actually make a difference in the world.
Couldn't agree more.
Makes you think, to quote Kamala Harris, about the significance of the passage of time.
If you think about it.
If you really think about it.
If you really think about it. It might be yesterday, which is perhaps tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm a coconut. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you guys for hanging out tonight.
Good to see you, sir. Good to see both of you.
Thanks for having us.
See you guys next time.